The shuttle doors opened, and Mira Vance stepped onto Station Helix Prime for the first time in her life. She was 17 years old, and she had never been so far from Earth. The space station was enormous, and it stretched in every direction, like a metal city floating in the darkness of space. Thousands of beings walked through the corridors, and most of them were species she had only seen in textbooks. Tall crystalline creatures that seemed to be made of living glass moved past her without a second glance. Massive four-armed insectoids chittered to each other in languages her translator struggled to process. Stone-skinned giants that looked like walking mountains stomped through the halls and made the floor vibrate. With every step, she was one of 3 humans in a class of 200 cadets, and she had never felt so small in her entire life. "Cadet Vance," a voice called out, and she turned to see her orientation officer approaching. He was a Valkyrie, and his body was made of something that looked like blue crystal, and his face had no real expression, but somehow she could tell he was not impressed with what he saw. He looked at his datapad and then looked at her and then looked at his datapad again, as if he could not believe the information was correct. "Earthborn," he said, and the words sounded like an insult. He laughed, and it was not a kind laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had just heard a very bad joke. "Yes, sir," Myra said, and she kept her voice steady, even though her hands wanted to shake. She had been warned about this. The Earth ambassador had sat her down before she left and told her exactly what to expect. "You will face prejudice," the ambassador had said. "You will face mockery, and you will face hatred. Humans are new to this galaxy, and most species think we do not belong here. You must not react. You must not give them any reason to say that humans are violent or emotional or dangerous. You represent all of us now." So Mira stood there and let the Valkyrie officer laugh at her, and she said nothing. "Follow me," he said finally. "Try to keep up, little gravity ape." She followed him through the winding corridors of the station, and everywhere she went, she felt eyes on her. Some of the looks were curious, but most of them were not friendly. She heard whispers as she passed, and her translator picked up words like Deathworlder and primitive and mistake. The academy dormitory was a massive circular room filled with bunks arranged by squad. Myra found her assigned bed, and it was in the corner far from everyone else. Her squad was already there, and they turned to look at her when she entered. There were 11 of them, not counting her. 4 Thracians with their hard shells and clicking mandibles. 3 Valkyrie who glowed faintly in the dim light. 2 Druun, whose rocky bodies took up twice as much space as anyone else. And 2 other species she did not recognize. The largest Thracian stepped forward, and his name was Corvus. She would learn to hate that name. "So this is the human," he said, and his mandibles clicked with what she would learn was amusement. "I thought they would be bigger. I thought they would be smarter," one of the Valkyrie added. "Is it true your species only developed space travel 60 years ago?" "Yes," Myra said simply. "How embarrassing," Corvus said. "My people have been sailing between stars for 12,000 years. Your ancestors were still hitting each other with rocks when we built our first fleet." Mira wanted to tell him that her ancestors had also built pyramids and great walls and sailed across oceans without maps. She wanted to tell him that humans had split the atom and walked on their moon and created art and music that could make people weep with joy. She wanted to tell him that Earth had produced warriors and poets and scientists and dreamers who had changed the course of history. But she remembered the ambassador's words, and she said, "Nothing. The first month was hard. The classes were designed for species that had been studying galactic warfare for generations, and Mira had to work twice as hard just to keep up." She stayed awake late into the night reading and studying and memorizing. She woke up early to practice the combat forms that felt awkward in her human body. The physical training was even worse. The zero-gravity combat drills assumed that cadets had hollow bones and low muscle mass, but Mira was from Earth. Her bones were dense and heavy, and her muscles were strong from growing up in gravity that would crush most other species. She moved too fast and hit too hard, and the instructors marked her down for lack of control. She learned to hold back. She learned to move slower and strike softer. She learned to pretend she was weaker than she really was, and still they mocked her. The little gravity ape thinks she can lead a boarding action, Corvith announced one day in the mess hall. His voice was loud enough for 3 tables to hear. Perhaps on her planet where they still burn hydrocarbons for fuel. Laughter erupted around her, and Mira kept her eyes on her food. It was synthesized protein, and it tasted like nothing, but she ate it anyway, because she needed the energy. I heard humans have to sleep for 8 hours every day, one of the Velkari said. 8 hours. Can you imagine wasting so much time? They also have to eat 3 times a day, another voice added. Their bodies are so inefficient. Myra finished her meal and stood up and walked away without saying a word. Behind her, she could hear them laughing and calling her names, but she did not turn around. At night, she lay in her bunk and stared at the ceiling and thought about home. She thought about her mother, who had cried when she left, and her father, who had hugged her so tight she could barely breathe. She thought about her little brother, who had made her promise to come back a hero. "I will make you proud," she had told them. "I will show them what humans can do." But right now, she did not feel like a hero. She felt like a scared girl who was very far from home and very much alone. She closed her eyes and made herself a promise. She would not quit. She would not give up. She would survive this place, and she would. Graduate, and she would prove every single one of them wrong. She did not know yet that her chance to prove herself would come sooner than she expected, and it would change everything. 3 months passed, and Mira learned the unspoken rules of the academy. She learned that humans were expected to fail. She learned that the instructors had designed everything around species that had been traveling through space for thousands of years. She learned that nobody believed she would make it to graduation, but she also learned something else. She learned that she was stronger than they thought, and she was stronger than she had thought too. The tactical simulations came easy to her. There was something about the way humans thought about war that surprised her instructors. While other species relied on superior technology or overwhelming numbers, Mira found creative solutions that nobody expected. She used asteroids as cover, and she turned enemy weapons against them, and she sacrificed pieces to win the whole game. Her scores climbed higher and higher. She started placing in the top 10, then the top 5. Then one day she placed first in a simulation that had stumped cadets for years. The instructor had stared at her results for a long time before finally saying, "Acceptable work, Cadet Vance." It was the closest thing to praise she had ever received, and she treasured it, but success came with a price. The more she excelled, the more her squad mates hated her. Corvith, in particular, seemed to take her achievements as a personal insult. The hazing started small at first. She would return to her bunk and find her equipment missing. Her uniform would be covered in adhesive compounds that took hours to scrub away. Her study materials would be deleted from her data pad. She reported none of it. She knew that complaining would only make things worse. She simply replaced what was lost and cleaned what was dirty and kept moving forward. Then the anonymous reports began. Someone was telling the instructors that Mira had displayed aggressive human behavior in the corridors. Someone was claiming that she had threatened other cadets. Someone was saying that she was dangerous and unstable. She was called into the disciplinary office 3 times in 2 weeks. Each time she denied the accusations, and each time the officer looked at her with suspicious eyes. "We are watching you, Cadet Vance," the officer said. "Humans have a reputation for violence. Do not prove that reputation correct." Myra wanted to scream that she had done nothing wrong. She wanted to demand to know who was making these false reports. She wanted to fight back, But she remembered her promise, and she stayed silent. The fourth month brought the combat evaluations, and this was what Myra had been dreading. The tests were designed to measure hand-to-hand fighting ability, and she had spent months learning to hold back her strength. She was terrified of hurting someone by accident. Her first opponent was a Valkyrie named Tessix, who was actually one of the kinder members of her squad. Tessix had never joined in the mockery and had even nodded at Mira. Once in the hallway, which was the closest thing to friendship she had, found they circled each other in the training. Ring and Tessix moved with fluid grace. Her crystalline body seemed to flow like water as she struck and dodged and weaved Myra, blocked and retreated and let Tessix push her around the ring. She could feel her muscles wanting to respond. She could feel the power coiled in her legs and arms and core. But she held back. The match ended in a draw, and the instructor marked them both as adequate. Later that night, Tessix found Myra in the study hall. "You were holding back," Tessix said quietly. "I could tell." "Why?" Myra looked around to make sure nobody was listening. "I do not want to hurt anyone." Tessix made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You are strange for a human. The others say your species is violent, but you seem afraid of your own strength. Maybe that is why we seem violent," Myra said. "Because we have to be so careful all the time. Because we know what we can do if we stop being careful." Tessix considered this for a moment. "That is surprisingly wise. Perhaps I have misjudged your species." It was the first real conversation Mira had with anyone since arriving at the academy, and it gave her hope that maybe not everyone here hated her, but that hope was about to be tested. It was late evening, 3 days after the combat evaluations, and Mira was walking back to the dormitory through a rarely used section of the station. Training Bay 7 was supposed to be closed for maintenance, but as she passed the doors, she heard voices. Inside, she should have kept walking. She should have ignored it and returned to her bunk. But something made her stop. Something made her listen. "The human comes this way every night," she heard Corvus say. "We will wait for her here." Myra's blood went cold. She turned to run, but it was too late. The doors behind her slid open, and 2 Thoraxians grabbed her arms and dragged her into the training bay. Corvus was waiting inside with 3 others. There were 5 of them in total. 2 Thoraxians besides Corvus himself. 1 Valkyrie whose crystal skin was dark and jagged, and a massive Druid whose stone body seemed to absorb the dim light. "We disabled the monitoring systems," Corvus said calmly. "We timed this between patrol cycles. Nobody is coming to help you, little ape." Mira struggled against the Thoraxians holding her, but they were strong, and they had 4 arms each. They shoved her backward until she hit the wall. "The instructors think you are special," Corvus said as he walked toward her slowly. "They think you have earned your place here." "We disagree. What do you want?" Myra asked, and her voice was steady, even though her heart was pounding. "We want you to understand the natural order," Corvus said. "Humans are beneath us. You always have been, and you always will be. Your species crawled out of the mud 60 years ago, and you think you deserve to stand beside civilizations that have existed for millennia. I earned my place here," Myra said. "I passed the same tests as everyone else." Corvus laughed, and his mandibles clicked with cruel amusement. "Tests can be manipulated. Standards can be lowered. But reality cannot be changed. You are weak. You are primitive. You do not belong here." He reached out with 2 of his 4 arms and grabbed her shoulders and lifted her off the ground. He pinned her against the wall and brought his face close to hers. "We are going to teach you a lesson tonight," he said. "And when we are done, you will beg to be sent back to your little death world." Myra looked into his eyes, and something inside her shifted. She had spent 4 months holding back. She had spent 4 months being careful and controlled and afraid. She had let them mock her, and she had let them steal. from her, and she had let them lie about her, but now they had her pinned against a wall, and there was nowhere left to retreat. You should walk away, she said, quite like Corvus laughed again. The little ape is threatening us. Mira felt the last of her restraint beginning to crack. I am not threatening you. I am warning you. Walk away now while you still can. Or what? Corvus asked. What will you do, Gravity Ape? Myra took a deep breath and made a choice. She was done holding back. Let me show you, she said. The Galactic Index of Species was a massive database that contained information about every known civilization in the galaxy. It had entries for thousands of different species, and it was considered the definitive source of knowledge about alien life. The entry for humans was short and dismissive. It mentioned that they had only developed faster than light travel 60 years ago. It noted their fractious political history and their tendency toward internal conflict. It warned about their concerning levels of adrenaline production and their unpredictable emotional responses. What the entry failed to mention was what 4 billion years of evolution on a high-gravity death world actually produced. It did not mention that human bones were dense enough to survive impacts that would shatter most other species. It did not mention that human muscles contained a unique fiber composition that could generate explosive force far beyond what their size suggested. It did not mention that human tendons were like braided steel cables that could store and release energy with terrifying efficiency. It did not mention that humans were persistence, predators who had once chased animals across endless plains until those animals collapsed from exhaustion. It did not mention that humans had fought cave bears and saber-toothed tigers with nothing but sharpened sticks. It did not mention that humans had looked at every apex predator on their world and said, "We are not afraid of you." It certainly did not mention what happened when a human stopped holding. Mira's right hand shot up and grabbed Corvus's primary wrist. Her fingers wrapped around the hard exoskeleton and she squeezed. The sound was somewhere between a crack and a crunch. It was the sound of something that was supposed to be unbreakable suddenly breaking. Corvus screamed. It was a high chittering sound of pure shock and agony. His mandibles flared wide and his grip on her shoulders vanished instantly. He dropped her and stumbled backward, clutching his ruined wrist. Mira landed on her feet perfectly balanced. 4 months of zero-gravity training had taught her how to control her body in any situation. She did not waste a single moment. The Valkyrie was closest. He was already moving toward her with his crystalline arms raised. His species was known for their speed and their reflexes, but Mira was faster. She stepped forward and drove her fist into his sternum. It was a simple, straight punch. Nothing fancy. Just pure concentrated force delivered through perfect technique. The Valkyrie flew backward 3 meters. His body hit the ground and slid another 2 meters before coming to a stop. He did not get up. Cracks spread across his crystalline chest like spiderwebs on glass. Down. 3 seconds had passed. What? One of the Thoraxians said. His voice was filled with disbelief. How did she? He never finished his sentence. Mira was already moving. She grabbed his lower right arm and twisted. The joint bent in a direction it was never meant to bend, and he howled in pain. She used his body as a shield against the other Thoraxian who was trying to grab her from behind. Then she kicked backward with her heel and felt it connect with something hard. The Thoraxian behind her grunted and stumbled away. The Druid finally moved. He had been standing back watching, and now he charged forward with all 800 pounds of his stone-like body. His footsteps shook the floor, and his rocky fists were raised to crush her. Most species would have run. Most species would have tried to dodge. But Myra was not most species. She was human, and humans did not run from a fight. She stepped into the punch. It was a technique her father had taught her when she was 12 years old. He had been a boxer in his youth, and he had shown her how to generate power from the ground up. You started with your feet planted firmly. You rotated your hips. You turned your shoulders. You extended your arm. And you put every single ounce of force into that one perfect moment of contact. Her fist connected with the drone's face. Stone cracked. The sound echoed through the training bay like thunder. The drone's head snapped back. His massive body swayed. Then he fell backward like a tree that had been cut down. The impact when he hit the floor made the whole room shake 5 down. 17 seconds had passed. Mira stood in the center of the training bay, surrounded by groaning bodies. Her knuckles were bruised and her heart was pounding, but she was not even breathing. Ard Corvith was on his knees, cradling his broken wrist. He looked up at her with something she had never seen in his eyes before. It was fear. "What are you?" he whispered. Myra walked toward him slowly. Her footsteps were the only sound in the room. She stopped in front of him and looked down at his trembling form. "You wanted to know the natural order," she said. "Let me explain it to you." She crouched down so that her face was level with his. "On my world, we were never the fastest. There were animals that could outrun us without even trying. We were never the strongest. There were creatures that could tear us apart with their bare hands. We were never the most venomous or the most armored or the most deadly." She leaned closer. "You know what we were. We were the ones that never stopped coming. We were the ones that tracked our prey for days and weeks until they collapsed from exhaustion. We were the ones that looked at every monster on our planet and figured out how to kill it." Corvith tried to back away, but he had nowhere to go. "Your species has been in space for 12,000 years. Mira continued. "My species built our first rocket less than a century ago. And yet, here I am, standing over you. Do you know why?" Corvith shook his head. "Because we are not afraid," Myra said. "We never have been. Fear is a luxury that evolution did not give us. We had to face our fears every single day just to survive. So we learned to turn fear into fuel. We learned to take our terror and transform it into something else." She stood up and looked down at him. "You call us primitive. You call us violent. You call us dangerous. Maybe you are right. Maybe we are all of those things. But we are also still here. After 4 billion years of fighting for every breath, we are still here. And we will keep going long after your species has forgotten what it means to struggle." She turned and walked toward the door. Behind her, she could hear Corvith whimpering and the others groaning in pain. She did not look back at the door. She paused. "Tell whoever you want about what happened tonight," she said. "Tell them the little gravity ape beat 5 cadets in 17 seconds. Tell them she broke your wrist with one hand. Tell them she cracked a drone skull with a single punch. She opened the door, and tell them this is what happens when you corner a human. We do not surrender. We do not beg, we fight. That is what Earth produces. That is what we are." She walked out into the corridor, and the door slid shut behind her. Her hands were shaking now, and her knuckles were starting to ache. The adrenaline was fading, and the reality of what she had done was beginning to sink in. She had just assaulted 5 fellow cadets. Her career at the academy was probably over. Everything she had worked for was gone. But as she walked back toward the dormitory, she realized something surprising. She did not regret it. Not even a little bit. For 4 months she had held back. For 4 months she had let them hurt her and mock her and make her feel worthless. For 4 months she had pretended to be less than she was. She was done pretending. Whatever happened next, she would face it the same way. Her ancestors had faced every challenge. With her head held high and her fists ready, she was human. She was from Earth. And she was not afraid. Admiral Velthrix had served in the unified galactic fleet for over 200 years. She had seen battles that burned across entire star systems. She had watched civilizations rise and fall. She had commanded ships that carried the fate of millions, but She had never seen anything quite like the footage playing on her screen. She watched it for the 7th time. Her many tentacles curled and uncurled with a mixture of emotions she could not quite name. On the screen, a small human girl was taking apart 5 cadets like they were made of paper. 17 seconds. That was how long the whole thing had lasted. 17 seconds from the moment she grabbed Corvith's wrist to the moment the drone hit the floor. The Admiral paused the footage and studied the human's form. Her technique was rough but effective. There was no wasted movement. Every strike landed exactly where it needed to land. Every block redirected force with perfect efficiency. This was not luck. This was training. This was instinct. This was something that had been built into this species over millions of years of violent evolution. Admiral, a voice said from the doorway. She turned to see Medical Officer Trexala entering her office. I have the injury reports you requested. Tell me, the Admiral said. Trexala consulted her datapad. Cadet Corvith has 3 fractures in his primary right wrist. The damage was severe enough that he will require reconstructive surgery. He will be unable to use that hand for at least 2 months. The Admiral nodded. Continue. The Volcari Cadet Jaxim has a cracked sternum and 3 broken ribs. He is stable, but will need extensive medical treatment. The 2 Thoraxian cadets have joint damage consistent with forced hyperextension. Painful but not permanent. And the Druin, Trexala hesitated. Cadet Garmok has a concussion. The Admiral's chromatophores flickered with surprise. A concussion. Through Druin cranial plating. That should not be possible. I know, Admiral. I ran the scans 3 times to confirm. The impact was sufficient to cause hairline fractures in his facial structure. I have never seen anything like it. And the human, Trexala, looked at her datapad again. Cadet Vance has bruised knuckles and minor swelling in her right hand. She's requesting permission to return to her regular training schedule. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. She turned back to the screen and started the footage again. She watched the human move with a predator's grace. She watched her take down opponents that outweighed her by hundreds of pounds. How did we miss this? She said quietly. Miss what, Admiral? This. The Admiral gestured at the screen. This species. We have been treating them like primitive newcomers. We have been mocking them and dismissing them and assuming they were inferior. But look at what this child can do. She pulled up the human's file on a second screen. 17 Earth years old. Raised in a city called Detroit. Recruited through standard aptitude testing. Nothing remarkable on paper. She scrolled down to the species information. Species origin Earth. Classification Death World Category 4. Native gravity 1.0 standard, which is marked as high. Atmospheric oxygen content 21%, also marked as high. Notable evolutionary pressures include apex predators, extreme climate variation, tribal warfare, persistence hunting. The Admiral read the words again, and this time she really thought about what they meant. We knew all of this, she said. We had all of this information in our file and we ignored it. We saw the words Death World and high gravity, and we did not stop to think about what that actually meant. Trexala shifted uncomfortably. Admiral, how should we proceed? The human did assault 5 cadets. There are rules about violence between students. Show me the full footage, the Admiral said. From the beginning, Trexala hesitated. The monitoring systems in Training Bay 7 were disabled. No, they were not. They were rerouted. Someone wanted a record of what happened. They just did not want anyone to see it in real time. The Admiral entered a series of commands and the footage rewound. Now she could see Corvith and his accomplices entering the training bay. She could see them disabling what they thought were the cameras. She could see them waiting in the darkness. Then she saw them drag the human inside. She saw them pin her against the wall. She saw Corvith lift her off the ground and bring his face close to hers. This was premeditated, the Admiral said. 5 cadets cornered a single human in a location they believed was unmonitored. They clearly intended to harm her. What she did was self-defense, but the severity of the injuries was proportional to the threat she faced. She was outnumbered 5-1 against opponents who were all larger and stronger than her. She neutralized the threat using the minimum force necessary. Trexala did not look convinced. With respect, Admiral, a Druun with a concussion is hardly minimum force. That Druun charged her with intent to cause serious harm. She had every right to defend herself. The fact that her defense was more effective than anyone expected does not make it wrong. The Admiral stood and walked to the window. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly in every direction. Somewhere out there was a small blue planet called Earth. A world of high gravity and violent weather and deadly predators. A world that had somehow produced beings capable of this. There is going to be pressure to expel her, Trexala said. The families of the injured cadets will demand it. They will say that humans are too dangerous to be trusted. Let them say it, the Admiral replied. I will not punish a cadet for defending herself against a group of bullies who thought they could attack her without consequences. She turned back to face the medical officer. Cadet Corvith and his accomplices will be disciplined for their actions. They disabled security systems and coordinated an assault on a fellow student. That is grounds for expulsion. And Cadet Vance, the Admiral looked at the frozen image on the screen. The human girl stood surrounded by fallen enemies. Her eyes were calm. Her stance was ready. She looked like someone who had been fighting her whole life. Promote her, the Admiral said. Trexala's eyes widened. The Admiral, promote her to squad leader. She has the highest tactical scores in her class. She has demonstrated the ability to remain calm under pressure. And she has shown that she is willing to stand up for herself, even when the odds are against her. But the other cadets will learn a valuable lesson. They will learn that humans are not to be underestimated. They will learn that the unified fleet values merit over prejudice. And they will learn that bullies will not be tolerated in my academy. The Admiral sat back down at her desk. Send Cadet Vance to my office. I want to speak with her personally. An hour later, Myra. Vance stood at attention in front of the most powerful officer in the academy. Her hands were still bandaged and her uniform was freshly pressed. She had expected to be expelled. She had expected to be sent home in disgrace. She had not expected this. Do you know why I called you here, Cadet? The Admiral asked. I assume it is because of what happened in Training Base 7, ma'am. It is. I have reviewed the footage, all of it, including the parts that Cadet Corvith thought he had erased. Myra felt a flicker of hope, but she kept her expression neutral. I see, ma'am. You defended yourself against 5 attackers, and you won. In 17 seconds. With your bare hands. Against species that have been training for combat for thousands of years. The Admiral leaned forward. Tell me, Cadet. Were you holding back before this incident? Myra hesitated. Yes, ma'am. Why? Because I was told that humans have a reputation for violence. I did not want to confirm that reputation. I wanted to prove that we could be disciplined and controlled. The Admiral made a sound that might have been a laugh. And how did that work out for you? Not well, ma'am. No. It did not. You spent 4 months letting others mistreat you because you were afraid of what they would think if you fought back. And all it did was make them think you were weak. The Admiral stood and walked around her desk until she was standing directly in front of Myra. I am going to give you some advice, Cadet. And I want you to remember it. Strength is not something to be ashamed of. It is something to be used wisely. You were wise to show restraint when you could. But you were also wise to fight when you had no other choice. She placed a small metal pin in Mira's hand. It was the insignia of a squad leader. Welcome to your new position, Cadet Vance. Do not make me regret this decision." Mira looked at the pen in her hand, and for the first time in months she allowed herself to smile. "I will not, ma'am. I promise." 1 year had passed since the night in Training Base 7, and everything had changed. Cadet First Class Mira Vance stood in front of a mirror in her quarters and adjusted her uniform for the 20th time. Today was the orientation ceremony for the new intake of cadets, and Admiral Velthrix had asked her to give the opening address. 300 new faces would be looking at her. 300 beings from across the galaxy who had traveled to Station Helix Prime to become officers in the unified fleet. And 12 of them were human. It was the largest class of human cadets in the Academy's history. Myra thought about how far she had come since that first day when an Valkyrie officer had laughed at her and called her a gravity ape. She thought about the months of mockery and isolation. She thought about the night she had finally stopped holding back. She thought about Corvith, who was now serving in a supply depot on the Outer Rim. His Academy career had ended the moment the Admiral reviewed the footage. The last she had heard, he was counting cargo containers on a station so remote it did not even have a name. She thought about Tessix the Volcari, who had noticed Mira holding back during combat training. They had become friends after the incident. Real friends. Tessix had been the first alien to treat Myra like an equal, and now they served together in the same squad. She thought about the Valkyrie she had hit that night. His name was Jaxim, and 6 months after the fight he had sought her out in the mess hall. She had expected anger or threats, but instead he had apologized. "I was wrong about your kind," he had said. "I thought you were primitive and weak. I thought you did not deserve to be here. I was a fool." They were not friends exactly, but they had come to respect each other. Sometimes that was more important than friendship to Dor to her. Quarters chimed, and Mira turned to see Admiral Velthrix standing in the corridor. "It is time, Cadet," the Admiral said. They walked together through the winding halls of the Academy. Everywhere they went, cadets and officers stopped to salute. Mira was well known now. The story of Training Base 7 had spread through the entire station. Some versions said she had fought 10 opponents. Some said 20. Some said she had done it blindfolded. The truth was impressive enough without exaggeration, but Mira had learned that stories had a life of their own. The lecture hall was enormous, and every seat was filled. 300 new cadets sat in perfect rows. Their species were so varied that the room looked like a living rainbow. Crystalline Valkyrie sat next to armored Thoraxians. Stone-skinned Druin shared benches with delicate winged creatures whose names Myra still could not pronounce, and scattered throughout the hall she could see human faces. Young men and women from Earth who had traveled across the stars to be here. They looked nervous and excited and terrified all at once. They looked exactly like she had felt 1 year ago. Myra walked to the podium at the front of the hall. The room fell silent. 300 pairs of eyes focused on her. "My name is Cadet First Class Myra Vance," she began. "1 year ago, I stood where you are standing now. I was 17 years old, and I had never been so far from home. I was one of 3 humans in my class, and I had never felt so alone in my entire life." She looked out across the sea of faces. "You are going to hear things during your time here. Things about where you come from and what you are. Some of you are from high-gravity worlds where the air is thick and the ground pulls at your bones. Some of you are from toxic atmospheres where every breath is a battle. Some of you are from planets with predators that would make the security I have nightmares." A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the hall. "And some of you are from paradise worlds, places where evolution was gentle and kind. Places where you never had to fight just to survive another day." She paused and let her words settle. "None of that matters here. The universe does not care what world shaped you. It does not care what species you belong to. It does not care how long your civilization has been sailing between the stars. All that matters is what you do with what you were given. She thought about the night they had pinned her against the wall. She thought about the choice she had made to stop holding back. She thought about everything that had happened since. I was pinned against a wall once, by people who thought they knew what I was capable of. They looked at my size and my species and my age, and they decided I was weak. They decided I was inferior. They decided I did not belong here. She held up her right hand. The knuckles were still faintly scarred. They were wrong. And anyone who tells you that you do not belong here is wrong too. She stepped out from behind the podium and walked to the edge of the stage. The galaxy is vast, and it is dangerous, and it needs officers who can adapt to any situation. It needs officers who can endure hardships that would break lesser beings. It needs officers who will protect each other, no matter what world they crawled out of. Her eyes found the 12 human cadets scattered through the audience. They were watching her with something like hope in their eyes. To the humans in this room, you are not alone anymore. There are more of us every year. We have proven that we deserve our place here. We have shown what Earth can produce. But never forget that we are part of something bigger now. We are not just humans. We are officers of the unified fleet. She turned to address everyone, and to everyone else. Look at the being sitting next to you. Really, look at them. That being might save your life someday. They might become your closest friend. They might be the one person standing between you and death when everything goes wrong. She walked back to the podium. Do not make the mistake of judging them before you know them. Do not assume you know what they are capable of based on their species or their homeworld. I have seen a Velkari show more courage than a Druin. I have seen a human show more restraint than species that have been practicing diplomacy for millennia. I have seen beings from every corner of this galaxy rise above what everyone expected of them. She stood at attention. In the years ahead, you will face challenges that seem impossible. You will face enemies that seem unbeatable. You will face moments when everything tells you to give up and go home. Her voice grew stronger. Do not listen. Do not give up. Do not let anyone tell you that you cannot succeed. She thought about her mother and father back on Earth. She thought about her little brother who had made her promise to come back a hero. She thought about all the humans who would come after her and walk these same halls. You are here because you earned your place. You are here because you have something to offer. You are here because the galaxy needs you. Snapped to attention and held a perfect salute. 300 cadets rose to their feet and saluted back. Welcome to the Unified Galactic Naval Academy. Now let us get to work. The applause that followed was thunderous. It echoed off the walls and filled the enormous room. Myra stood at attention and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt like she belonged after the ceremony. Admiral Velthrix found her standing, alone on an observation deck overlooking the stars. Earth was not visible from this part of the galaxy, but Mira knew exactly where it was. She could feel it somehow. A distant pull like gravity or like home. That was a fine speech, Cadet. The Admiral said, "Thank you, ma'am. You have come a long way from the scared girl who arrived here 14 months ago." Myra smiled. "I was never scared, ma'am. I was just waiting for the right moment." The Admiral made a sound that might have been a laugh. "I believe you. I believe you were dangerous from the very first day. You simply chose not to show it." They stood in silence for a moment watching the stars. "What happens now, ma'am?" Myra asked. "Now you continue to train. You continue to improve. You continue to show this galaxy what humans can do. And when you graduate, you will take your place in the fleet, and you will make us proud." Mira nodded. "I will, ma'am. I promise." The Admiral turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Cadet Vance. One more thing." "Yes, ma'am." The incident in Training Bay 7 has become something of a legend. Cadets whisper about it in the corridors. They call it the night the humans stopped pretending. Myra said nothing. I want you to know that I have recommended your file be used as a case study in tactical combat training. Future generations of cadets will learn from what you did that night. Is that a good thing, ma'am? The Admiral's chromatophores, shifted to a color Myra had learned meant amusement. It is a reminder. A reminder that the smallest person in the room is sometimes the one you should never corner. She left, and Myra was alone with the stars. She thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The mockery and the isolation and the pain. The night she had finally fought back. The year of growth and change that followed. She thought about the future. About the officers she would train, and the battles she would fight, and the legacy she would leave behind. She was still young. She was still learning. She had so much further to go, but she was no longer afraid. She was no longer alone. She was no longer pretending to be less than she was. She was Myra Vance. She was from Earth. She was human, and she was exactly where she belonged.